Picture this. You're 8 months pregnant, sitting in a homeless shelter, watching your tech billionaire husband celebrate with his mistress on social media while you fight for your baby's life in the hospital. Sound like a nightmare? For Sarah Mitchell, this was Tuesday. But here's what Derek Sterling didn't know when he publicly humiliated his pregnant wife at a tech conference in front of 3,000 people. He didn't know that his mistress was secretly recording every conversation. He didn't know that his business partner was planning to betray him, and he definitely didn't know that the woman he tried to destroy would become the architect of his complete downfall. What started as a simple affair became a web of fraud, manipulation, and revenge that would shock Silicon Valley to its core. By the time Derek realized what was happening, his IPO was collapsing live on social media. Federal agents were at his door, and the two women he thought he controlled were about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when powerful men underestimate the women they try to break. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about power, justice, and the price of cruelty. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in the doorway of Derek's home office, her 6-month pregnant belly pressed against the doorframe as she stared at his open laptop. She had only come to remind him about dinner with her parents, but the screen displayed something that made her blood turn to ice. Messages, hundreds of them, between Derek and someone named Madison Cross. "Can't wait to have you all to myself tonight, baby. That pregnant whale won't suspect a thing. Hotel room is booked under your usual alias." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to protect her swollen stomach. The baby kicked as if sensing her distress. 3 years of marriage, and this was how Derek Sterling saw her, not as his wife carrying his child, but as an obstacle to his pleasure. The office door slammed behind her. Derek's voice echoed through their $15 million San Francisco mansion. "Sarah, where the hell is dinner? I told my investors we'd have something impressive waiting." She scrolled frantically through months of messages. Hotel reservations during his supposed business trips. Vacation photos from conferences she hadn't been invited to attend. Her own anniversary necklace, the one Derek claimed was custom-made just for her, gleaming around another woman's neck in a selfie taken just last week. "Found you snooping again," Derek said from behind her, his voice cold as winter steel. Sarah turned to face her husband. Derek Sterling stood in his custom Italian suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his blue eyes holding nothing but contempt. At 35, he was everything Silicon Valley worshipped: young, brilliant, ruthlessly successful. His tech startup had just been valued at $200 million, making him one of the most eligible bachelors in America. Except he wasn't eligible. He was married to her. "Derek, I saw the messages," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Derek loosened his Hermes tie and walked to his private bar, pouring himself 3 fingers of whiskey that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He didn't look surprised or guilty. He looked annoyed, like she had interrupted an important call. "Which messages?" he asked, taking a slow sip. "The ones with Madison Cross, the hotels, the photos." Sarah's voice cracked. "The things you said about me." Derek studied her face with the same expression he used when analyzing market data: calculating, detached, completely without warmth. "So what if you did?" The casual indifference hit harder than screaming would have. Sarah felt her knees buckle. "So what? Derek, I'm pregnant with your child." "You're pregnant with my heir," Derek corrected, moving closer until she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with whiskey. "That's different. Madison gives me what you can't anymore. What you stopped being able to give me the moment you got fat and started whining about your feet hurting." Each word was a calculated strike designed to inflict maximum damage. Sarah pressed her back against his desk, trapped between her husband and the evidence of his betrayal. "I gave up my nursing career for you," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I moved across the country. I supported you through 2 failed startups before this one succeeded." Derek laughed, a sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. "You gave up changing bedpans in some Detroit hospital to live in a mansion in Pacific Heights. You went from a $40,000 salary to unlimited credit cards and designer gowns. Don't pretend you're some kind of victim here. I'm carrying your baby, Derek. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" For just a moment, something flickered in Derek's eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Then it vanished, replaced by the shark-like focus that had made him millions. The baby will have everything, he said, checking his phone. Private schools, trust funds, the best tutors money can buy. That's what matters. Not whether mommy gets her feelings hurt because daddy has adult relationships with women who understand his world. The cruelty was breathtaking. Sarah stared at this stranger wearing her husband's face. The Derek she had fallen in love with 4 years ago had been passionate and driven, but also kind. He had held her hand during her father's cancer treatment. He had proposed under the Golden Gate Bridge at sunset, promising to love and protect her forever. That man had vanished, replaced by this cold, calculating predator. Madison understands the tech industry, Derek continued, his voice growing more animated as he spoke about his mistress. She gets my vision for the future. She knows how to dress for investor meetings and galas. She makes me look successful instead of like some guy who settled for a nurse from Detroit. Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled, the first genuine emotion he had shown since entering the room. Speaking of Madison, she's waiting in the car. We're taking the investors to dinner at French Laundry. $300 per person, but it's worth it for the impression it makes. He grabbed his jacket from the leather chair. Don't wait up. We'll probably get a suite in Napa afterward. For business discussions, of course. He paused at the door, turning back with one final twist of the knife. Oh, and Sarah? You might want to think about hitting the gym tomorrow. The baby weight is really starting to show, and you're only 6 months along. Madison says you look like you're carrying twins. The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Through the office's floor-to-ceiling glass, Sarah watched Derek slide into a red Tesla Model S where a young blonde woman waited. Even from 3 stories up, Sarah could see that Madison Cross was everything she wasn't. Thin, glamorous, unencumbered by pregnancy or the responsibilities of being a wife. Sarah sank into Derek's executive chair, her hand protectively covering her belly as the baby kicked frantically, responding to her elevated heart rate and stress hormones. The laptop screen still glowed with evidence of Derek's betrayal, but now she noticed something else. Bank statements, invoices, financial documents scattered across his desk. The man who had just destroyed her world had left his entire business empire accessible. And Sarah had been a nurse long enough to know that when someone is in pain, sometimes the only option is surgery, even if it means cutting out something that once seemed essential. As Derek's Tesla disappeared into the San Francisco fog, Sarah began to plan. She didn't know it yet, but her husband had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had underestimated the woman he married. 2 weeks after discovering Derek's affair, Sarah found herself in the front row of the Moscone Center, surrounded by 3,000 of Silicon Valley's most influential people. The TechCrunch Disrupt conference was Derek's moment of triumph, his chance to announce ConnectNow's Series B funding round and establish himself as a major player in the social media space. Derek had insisted she attend, claiming he needed to project family values to conservative investors. The irony burned like acid in her throat. Sarah adjusted her navy maternity dress, the most elegant piece in her wardrobe that still fit her growing belly. Around her, venture capitalists and startup founders filled the auditorium, their conversations buzzing with the electric energy of ambition and money. Tech journalists lined the press section, cameras ready to capture Derek's big moment. The lights dimmed. Derek strode onto the stage with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his own brilliance. He wore his lucky Navy Tom Ford suit and his Harvard Business School smile, the same expression that had charmed investors out of $50 million. Ladies and gentlemen, Derek began, his voice carrying perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system. Welcome to the future of authentic human connection. Sarah watched her husband command the room with practiced ease. This was Derek at his most dangerous. Charismatic, visionary, completely in control. For a fleeting moment, she remembered why she had fallen in love with him. Before success had corrupted him, before money had become his only measure of human worth. Connect now isn't just another social app, Derek continued, clicking to a slide showing user growth projections. We're building the platform that will define how the next generation forms meaningful relationships. Applause rippled through the audience. Sarah noticed several investors in the front rows nodding approvingly. Derek's presentation was flawless, his metrics impressive, his vision compelling. No one watching would guess that his personal life was built on lies and betrayal. Today, I'm thrilled to announce our Series B funding round of $75 million, Derek said. The audience erupted in applause. But more importantly, I want to introduce you to the creative genius behind our revolutionary marketing strategy. Sarah's stomach dropped. Derek was looking directly at her, but his smile held something cold and predatory. Please welcome Connect Now's new Chief Creative Officer, Madison Cross. Madison emerged from the wings like she owned the stage. She wore a scarlet-red dress that hugged every curve, her platinum blonde hair styled in perfect Hollywood waves. The predominantly male audience leaned forward appreciatively, phones appearing to capture her entrance. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Derek had never mentioned hiring Madison. This was the first she was hearing about any official position for his mistress. Madison took the microphone with practiced ease, her voice carrying the sultry confidence of someone who had spent years manipulating men with her beauty. "Thank you, Derek," she purred, placing her manicured hand on his arm and letting it linger just a moment too long. "I'm absolutely thrilled to be working so intimately with such a visionary leader." The word intimately hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles went white. "Madison brings a fresh perspective to our brand," Derek said, his eyes locked on his mistress with undisguised desire. "She understands what successful, attractive young people want from their digital connections." Each word was a calculated insult aimed directly at Sarah. Young, successful, attractive. Everything she supposedly wasn't in Derek's estimation. In the audience, phones began appearing as tech bloggers sensed a story. The scene unfolding on stage was pure Silicon Valley drama. The successful CEO introducing his young, beautiful employee, while his pregnant wife sat in the front row like a museum exhibit. Madison leaned closer to the microphone, her lips almost brushing the metal as she spoke. "Derek and I have been collaborating very closely," she said, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper that somehow carried through the entire auditorium. "Very closely. We've spent countless late nights together, really diving deep into user experience and engagement metrics." The double entendre wasn't subtle. Murmurs began rippling through the crowd as people turned to look at Sarah. She could feel hundreds of eyes boring into her, could see the mixture of pity and fascination on faces throughout the auditorium. Derek's smile never wavered. If anything, he seemed energized by the spectacle, feeding off the attention and the power of publicly humiliating his wife. "Madison's insights have been invaluable," he continued, stepping closer to her until their bodies were almost touching. "She's shown me things about our target demographic that I never would have discovered working alone." A tech blogger in the third row was typing furiously on his laptop. Sarah could practically see the headline forming: "Tech Bro Flaunts Affair at Major Conference While Pregnant Wife Watches." Madison turned to face the audience, her predatory smile aimed directly at Sarah. "The future of Connect Now is about authentic connections between people who truly understand each other," she said, her gaze never leaving Sarah's face. "Sometimes you have to cut ties with relationships that no longer serve your growth trajectory." The cruelty was surgical in its precision. Sarah's hands began shaking as the full scope of Derek's plan became clear. This wasn't just about flaunting his affair. This was about publicly positioning Madison as his replacement, establishing her as the face of his company while reducing Sarah to an embarrassing reminder of his past. Derek wrapped up the presentation with revenue projections and user acquisition costs, but Sarah heard none of it. The damage was done. When the lights came up, the murmur of voices filled the auditorium like buzzing insects. She could feel phones pointed in her direction, could hear fragments of whispered conversations. "Is that really his wife? She looks completely humiliated. How much do you think she'll get in the divorce?" A tech journalist approached before Sarah could escape. "Mrs. Sterling, do you have any comment on your husband's new chief creative officer?" Sarah's voice caught in her throat. She pushed past the reporter and stumbled toward the exit, her pregnant body moving as quickly as she could manage. Behind her, she could hear Derek's laughter mixing with Madison's, the sound echoing through the auditorium like nails on a chalkboard. In the bathroom, Sarah locked herself in a stall and sobbed until her chest ached. The baby kicked frantically, responding to her distress with movements that felt almost violent. She pressed both hands to her belly and whispered apologies to her unborn child. "I'm so sorry, baby. Mommy's going to figure this out, somehow." When she finally emerged from the bathroom, Sarah caught sight of herself in the mirror. Red, swollen eyes, tear-stained cheeks, a rumpled dress that emphasized every pound she had gained. She looked exactly like what Derek had painted her as, a broken, desperate woman with nowhere to go. Her phone was buzzing with notifications. The video was already viral. Social media was exploding with commentary about Derek's public humiliation of his pregnant wife. Tech bro affair was trending nationwide. Her personal tragedy had become entertainment for millions of strangers. But as Sarah stared at her reflection, something shifted inside her. The woman looking back at her had been a nurse for 5 years before Derek convinced her to give up her career. She had saved lives, managed crisis situations, fought for patients when doctors had given up hope. That woman was still in there somewhere, buried under months of emotional abuse and manipulation, and she was angry. Very, very angry. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. Derek controlled their joint accounts, but she still had access to her old savings account from her nursing days. $12,000. Not much by Silicon Valley standards, but enough to hire a lawyer. Enough to start fighting back. As she walked out of the Moscone Center into the San Francisco afternoon, Sarah began to plan her counterattack. Derek thought he had destroyed her credibility by making her a public laughingstock, but he had underestimated two crucial factors. First, the internet loved an underdog story, especially when it involved a powerful man abusing a pregnant woman. Second, Sarah knew where all the bodies were buried in Derek's business empire, and she was about to start digging them up. Jennifer Walsh's law office occupied the 42nd floor of a downtown San Francisco skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the Bay Area. Sarah sat across from the city's most feared divorce attorney, using her old nursing savings to afford the best legal representation money could buy. "I've reviewed your prenuptial agreement," Jennifer said, sliding a thick document across her mahogany desk. "There's excellent news." Sarah leaned forward, her heart racing with hope. After 2 weeks of viral humiliation and Derek's increasingly sadistic behavior, she desperately needed something to go her way. "The adultery clause," Jennifer continued, pointing to a section highlighted in yellow. "If your husband commits infidelity during the marriage, the entire prenuptial agreement becomes null and void. You would be entitled to 50% of all marital assets." Sarah stared at the words on the page, reading them twice to make sure she understood correctly. 50% of everything? But Derek always said the prenup was ironclad. "Not if he violated its fundamental terms," Jennifer explained, her smile sharp as a blade. "And based on the evidence you've provided, we have an overwhelming case for adultery. The text messages, the public display at the tech conference, the hotel receipts you photographed, it's more than sufficient." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt genuine hope blooming in her chest. Derek's company was valued at $200 million. Their Pacific Heights mansion alone was worth $15 million. The art collection, the cars, the investment portfolio, half of everything would set her and her baby up for life. "What's our strategy?" Sarah asked. Jennifer's expression turned predatory. "We document everything. Every public appearance with his mistress, every cruel statement, every dollar spent on hotels and gifts for her. Men like your husband think their money makes them untouchable. We're going to prove them catastrophically wrong." Over the next week, Sarah felt like herself again for the first time since discovering Derek's affair. She hired Marcus Hernandez, a private investigator who specialized in high-net-worth divorces. She photographed every receipt Derek carelessly left around their house. She saved every text message where he referenced Madison or made disparaging comments about their marriage. The evidence was overwhelming and growing daily. Derek wasn't even attempting to hide his relationship anymore. He brought Madison to investor dinners, tech conferences, even his company's board meetings. The press covered their every appearance, treating them like Silicon Valley's new power couple, while Sarah was relegated to unflattering paparazzi shots outside grocery stores and doctor's appointments. But Derek's arrogance was his weakness. He was so drunk on success and Madison's attention that he seemed oblivious to the legal implications of his behavior. At home, he barely acknowledged Sarah's existence, except to make cutting remarks about her appearance or intelligence. "You're looking particularly pathetic today," he said one morning, finding Sarah eating breakfast in their designer kitchen. Madison mentioned you should probably start shopping in the maternity section at Target instead of trying to squeeze into designer clothes. You're embarrassing yourself. We'll see who's embarrassed soon, Sarah replied quietly, her newfound confidence making her bold. Derek laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. What's that supposed to mean? Are you planning to write another dramatic Facebook post about how misunderstood you are? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Nothing, Derek. Just enjoying my breakfast. She could see the confusion flicker across his face. For months, his cruelty had reduced her to tears and desperate apologies. This calm resistance was new, and it clearly unsettled him. The divorce papers were filed on a Tuesday morning. Sarah chose to serve Derek at his office during a board meeting, maximizing the public embarrassment and ensuring his investors would witness his personal life imploding. Marcus Hernandez's process server walked into Connect Now's glass-walled conference room at exactly 10:15, interrupting Derek's quarterly presentation to hand him the legal documents. Derek's face went white as he read the filing. Sarah was demanding half of his company, half of all marital assets, full custody of their unborn child, substantial spousal support, and attorney's fees. More importantly, she was citing the adultery clause that supposedly voided their prenuptial agreement. The board members shifted uncomfortably as Derek struggled to maintain his composure. Several investors whispered among themselves, clearly concerned about the potential impact on the company's valuation. Within an hour, Derek burst through their front door, the crumpled papers clutched in his fist like a weapon. You think you're clever? He snarled, cornering Sarah in their living room. You think you found some loophole that's going to make you rich? I think I found the truth, Sarah said calmly, her hand resting protectively on her 7-month belly. You violated our marriage contract. Now you face the consequences. Derek's blue eyes blazed with a fury she had never seen before. For a moment, Sarah wondered if he might actually become physically violent. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Robert, it's Derek. She filed, using the adultery clause exactly like we predicted. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. No, stick to the plan. She has no idea what's coming. He ended the call and turned back to Sarah with a smile that made her blood freeze. You're about to learn why I'm worth $200 million and you're nobody, he said. Enjoy the next few days, Sarah. They're going to be your last as anything other than a cautionary tale. That evening, Sarah called her parents in Detroit for the first time since the TechCrunch disaster. Honey, are you sure about this? Her mother asked after Sarah explained the divorce filing. Derek has expensive lawyers and a lot of money. I'm positive, Mom. The prenup has an adultery clause. He's going to lose half of everything he's built. Be careful, sweetheart. Men like that don't go down without a fight. Sarah touched her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. Let him fight. I have the law on my side, and I have nothing left to lose. For the first time in months, Sarah slept peacefully. Tomorrow, Derek would discover that his actions had consequences. Tomorrow, she would begin reclaiming not just her dignity, but her financial future. But Sarah had no idea that Derek's team of lawyers had been preparing for this exact scenario since before his affair with Madison even began. The man who had built a tech empire by anticipating market moves wasn't about to be outmaneuvered by the wife he considered expendable. The trap had been set months ago. Sarah was about to walk directly into it, and when she did, the impact would destroy not just her legal case, but everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her husband, and her own past. The courtroom felt smaller than Sarah had expected, its wood-paneled walls seeming to close in as she sat beside Jennifer Walsh. Across the aisle, Derek's legal team arranged their documents with military precision. Derek himself sat perfectly composed in a charcoal Armani suit, radiating the quiet confidence of a man who held all the cards. Don't worry, Jennifer whispered, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. The adultery clause is explicit. We have overwhelming evidence. This should be straightforward. Judge Patricia Martinez called the proceedings to order. Sarah felt her baby kick as she stood, a reminder of everything she was fighting to protect. Derek's lead attorney, Robert Chen, rose first. He was a legendary figure in high-stakes divorce litigation, known for destroying opposing parties so thoroughly they never recovered. His hourly rate was more than most people's annual salary. Your Honor, Chen began, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in family court. My client acknowledges that Mrs. Sterling believes she has grounds to void their prenuptial agreement based on alleged infidelity. However, the document Mrs. Sterling and her counsel are referencing is not the executed prenuptial agreement. Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Jennifer shot to her feet like she'd been electrocuted. Objection, Your Honor. We have the signed, notarized prenuptial agreement. It's been filed with the court. Chen's smile was surgical in its precision. What Mrs. Sterling possesses is a draft document that was never legally executed. The actual prenuptial agreement, properly filed and notarized, contains significantly different terms. He approached the bench with a thick folder that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Sarah watched Judge Martinez review the documents, her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. Your Honor, Jennifer said, her voice rising with desperation, this is the first time we're hearing about any second document. My client signed only one prenuptial agreement. Which she did, Chen agreed smoothly, 72 hours after signing the draft she's been referencing. The final version, which she also signed, contains fundamentally different provisions. No adultery clause. No grounds for voiding. Mrs. Sterling is entitled to exactly what the valid agreement specifies. $100,000 and no claim to marital assets acquired during the marriage. The courtroom began spinning around Sarah. That's impossible, she whispered to Jennifer. I never signed a second agreement. I would remember. Jennifer was frantically comparing documents, her face growing pale as she studied the papers Chen had provided. The signature was definitely Sarah's. The notary stamp was official. Even the date made perfect sense, falling just days before their wedding when Sarah had been overwhelmed with final preparations. Judge Martinez's voice cut through Sarah's panic like a scalpel. Mrs. Walsh, do you have any evidence that your client did not willingly execute the document being presented by opposing counsel? Jennifer's hands were visibly shaking as she studied the signature pages. Your Honor, I need time to review these documents with my client and potentially hire a handwriting expert. You have 30 minutes, Judge Martinez said. Court is in recess. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Jennifer's professional composure finally cracked. Sarah, I need you to think very carefully. Do you remember signing any other documents in the days before your wedding? Insurance forms? Bank paperwork? Anything Derek might have presented as routine? Sarah's mind raced back 3 years to the chaos of wedding preparations. Derek had been handling most of the logistics while she focused on her nursing job and the ceremony details. He had presented her with a stack of papers one evening, claiming they were standard legal housekeeping for married couples. Insurance beneficiaries, Sarah whispered, the memory flooding back. Joint bank account authorizations. Real estate documentation for putting my name on the house deed. There were so many papers to sign. He buried the real prenup in routine paperwork, Jennifer said, her voice hollow with defeat. It's a classic strategy, completely legal and absolutely devastating. When they returned to the courtroom, Sarah felt like she was walking to her execution. Chen was clearly savoring every moment. Furthermore, Your Honor, he continued, Mrs. Sterling's frivolous filing has caused my client significant financial damage and reputational harm. Mr. Sterling's company stock price dropped 12% following news of this baseless lawsuit. We're seeking full reimbursement of legal costs, sanctions against opposing counsel for failing to properly investigate their claims, and punitive damages for malicious prosecution. The gavel fell like a death sentence. Not only had Sarah lost any claim to Derek's assets, but she now owed his legal team over $300,000. Money she didn't have and couldn't possibly raise. This court finds that Mrs. Sterling filed this action without proper legal basis, Judge Martinez announced. The defendant's motion for attorney's fees is granted in the amount of $325,000 to be paid within 60 days. Outside the courthouse, Derek waited with Madison and a pack of photographers. They posed like Hollywood royalty, Derek's arm protectively around his mistress, while she displayed her engagement ring for the cameras. Better luck next time, Sarah, Derek called out loud enough for the reporters to hear. Oh wait, there won't be a next time. Maybe try changing bedpans again, if any hospital will hire you after this public meltdown. Madison laughed, her voice carrying like breaking glass. Derek, be nice. She's obviously struggling with the stress of pregnancy. Some women just can't handle the pressure of being married to successful men. Sarah stood frozen on the courthouse steps, Jennifer's steadying hand on her shoulder. The photographers captured every moment of her devastation, another viral moment for the internet to dissect and mock. "Mrs. Sterling," a reporter shouted, "do you have any comment on the judge's ruling?" Sarah looked up at the wall of cameras, at Derek's triumphant expression, at Madison's sneering face. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely audible. "I trusted the wrong person." That evening, Sarah sat alone in their $15 million mansion, knowing it would soon belong entirely to Derek. Her $100,000 settlement wouldn't cover 6 months of living expenses in San Francisco, let alone $300,000 in legal fees. Her phone rang with her father's gentle voice. "Honey, we saw the news coverage. Do you want to come home to Detroit?" "Dad," Sarah said, her voice breaking, "I had to put your house up as collateral for the legal fees. If I can't pay Derek's lawyers, you and Mom could lose everything too." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Her parents' modest retirement home, their life savings, all of it was now at risk because Sarah had believed in justice. She had never felt more alone or more foolish, but the worst was yet to come. Derek wasn't finished destroying her. He was just getting started, and tomorrow the real cruelty would begin. The stress manifested in Sarah's body like a physical assault. She woke at 3 in the morning, doubled over in agony, blood staining her nightgown and the Egyptian cotton sheets that would soon belong to Derek and Madison. The baby at 7.5 months was in severe distress. "Please God, not my baby," Sarah whispered through tears as she dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The ambulance ride to California Pacific Medical Center was a blur of sirens and worried voices. In the emergency room, Dr. Sarah Patel's expression was grave as she studied the ultrasound monitor. "Mrs. Sterling, you're experiencing severe pregnancy complications brought on by acute stress syndrome. Your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and the baby is showing signs of fetal distress. We need to admit you immediately for monitoring and potential emergency delivery." "Is my baby going to survive?" Sarah asked, gripping the hospital bed rails until her knuckles went white. "We're doing everything medically possible," Dr. Patel said carefully. "But you need to eliminate all stressors from your life immediately, or we could face a catastrophic outcome for both you and the baby." Sarah called Derek from her hospital bed, sobbing into the phone as monitors beeped around her. "Derek, please come. The baby might die. Our baby might die." Derek's voice was ice cold. "I'm in the middle of a crucial board meeting with Madison. We're finalizing our IPO strategy. Can't this wait until evening?" "Derek, our child could die today. Right now, I'm begging you." "The child will be fine. You're being dramatic as usual. Try not to make a scene for the medical staff. It reflects poorly on the family name." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone in absolute disbelief. Even facing the potential death of their unborn child, Derek couldn't be bothered to show the slightest concern or compassion. 2 hours later, while Sarah lay connected to machines monitoring her baby's failing heartbeat, her phone buzzed with a social media notification. Derek had posted on Instagram a photo of himself and Madison at the exclusive Atelier Cren restaurant, champagne glasses raised in celebration. The caption read, "Celebrating major business victories with my brilliant chief creative officer. While some people create drama, others create success and value. Here's to the future." The post had already garnered thousands of likes and hundreds of comments. Many supported Derek, calling Sarah a gold-digging drama queen and praising him for not letting personal issues interfere with business excellence. Others were horrified by his callousness, but their voices were drowned out by his supporters. The story exploded across social media platforms. Tech CEO celebrates while pregnant wife hospitalized in critical condition. But Derek's public cruelty was only the beginning of Sarah's nightmare. 3 days after returning home from the hospital, weak and emotionally shattered, Sarah received a certified letter from Derek's legal team. The envelope contained documents that would destroy what remained of her financial stability. Derek was freezing all joint bank accounts, claiming she posed a flight risk who might attempt to hide assets before paying his court-ordered legal fees. The motion, filed by Robert Chen, painted Sarah as a desperate woman who might flee the country to avoid her financial obligations. Sarah's credit cards were declined at the pharmacy when she tried to buy prenatal vitamins. Her phone service was disconnected. Her health insurance was canceled, leaving her with mounting medical bills from her hospitalization. When she attempted to access their joint savings account to pay for groceries, the bank informed her that Derek had legally transferred all funds to accounts solely in his name. Sarah had exactly $97 in her personal checking account. "Mrs. Sterling," the banker said with genuine sympathy, "I'm afraid there's nothing we can do without your husband's authorization. Perhaps you should discuss this situation with him directly." The suggestion was so absurd, Sarah almost laughed. Discuss the situation with Derek, the man who had posted celebration photos while she fought for their baby's life? The eviction notice arrived by courier 2 days later. Sarah read the legal document 3 times before its meaning fully penetrated her shock. Derek was evicting her from their marital home, claiming she had no legal right to remain since the property was titled exclusively in his name. She had 30 days to vacate or face forcible removal by law enforcement. The timing was surgical in its cruelty. 8 months pregnant, financially destroyed, facing massive legal debts, and now homeless. That evening, Sarah stood in what had been their bedroom, surrounded by the luxury that had once made her feel like she had won life's lottery. The Italian marble, the designer furniture, the walk-in closet filled with gowns she would never wear again. All of it mocked her now. Her phone, which Derek had graciously allowed to remain connected for emergency medical purposes only, buzzed with a news alert that made her physically ill. Madison Cross had officially moved into the Sterling mansion. The paparazzi photos showed her lounging by the infinity pool, wearing Sarah's favorite white bikini, the one Derek had bought her for their honeymoon in Santorini. The accompanying article was brutal in its casual cruelty. Madison Cross makes herself at home in Sterling Mansion, while ex-wife faces eviction. See, but the photo that broke Sarah's spirit completely showed Madison in the nursery Sarah had spent months carefully preparing. The soft yellow walls Sarah had painted by hand were now covered with bold black and white stripes. The antique rocking chair Sarah's grandmother had given her was gone, replaced by a modern chrome and leather monstrosity. Even the mobile of gentle forest animals had been replaced with sharp geometric shapes. They were erasing every trace of Sarah's existence before her baby was even born. Sarah collapsed onto their king-size bed, her hands protectively covering her swollen belly. The baby's movements had grown weaker since the hospital scare, as if the stress was affecting them both. "I'm so sorry, little one," she whispered to her unborn child. "Mommy tried to fight for us, but some battles can't be won by being right." Her phone rang with her mother's worried voice. "Sweetheart, we've been watching the news. Come home to Detroit. We'll figure something out together." "Mom, if I can't pay Derek's legal fees, they'll take your house too. I can't destroy your retirement because I was naive enough to trust my husband." The long silence that followed told Sarah everything she needed to know. Her parents' fixed income barely covered their own expenses. They couldn't save her without destroying themselves. Sarah was completely alone, 8 months pregnant, with no money, no home, and nowhere to turn. She had exactly 30 days before she would be living on the streets, but she had no idea that her salvation was already watching from the shadows, and that Derek's moment of absolute triumph was about to become the first domino in his own destruction. The worst betrayal was still coming, and when it arrived, it would make everything else look like a practice round. New Dawn Women's Shelter occupied a converted warehouse in Oakland, 45 minutes by bus from the life Sarah used to know. The facility was clean but institutional, filled with women fleeing domestic violence, addiction, and homelessness. Sarah shared a dormitory-style room with 5 other women, her few remaining possessions stored in a plastic bin under a narrow cot that smelled of industrial disinfectant. "Never thought I'd see a tech wife in here," said Rosa Martinez, a woman in her 50s who'd been at the shelter for 4 months after her ex-husband destroyed her credit and had her fired from 3 jobs. "But I guess money don't protect you from men who want to break you?" Sarah tried to maintain some dignity, but sleeping in a homeless shelter while 8 months pregnant was humbling in ways she had never imagined. Every night she felt her baby's increasingly weak movements, as if her stress and malnutrition were slowly poisoning the life growing inside her. The breaking point came when Derek's public relations team launched their final, devastating assault on her character. Sarah first learned about it when Maria, another shelter resident, approached her with a smartphone, her expression a mixture of sympathy and horror. "Girl, you need to see this. It's everywhere." The video was dominating every news cycle. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, every major network was running the story. A professionally produced segment titled, "The Truth About Sarah Sterling, a Tech Executive's Disturbing Marriage." Derek appeared on camera in their former living room, wearing his most sincere expression and a navy sweater that made him look approachable and trustworthy. Madison sat beside him, her hand resting supportively on his arm, playing the role of concerned girlfriend, helping her partner through a difficult revelation. "I've stayed silent to protect Sarah's privacy," Derek began, his voice heavy with manufactured sadness. "But I can't watch her destroy herself and potentially harm our unborn child without speaking the truth." Sarah's blood froze as Derek continued. "Sarah's behavior during our marriage became increasingly erratic and violent. She threatened me repeatedly, both physically and emotionally. She threw objects, destroyed valuable property, and even threatened to harm herself and our baby if I attempted to leave her." The screen filled with security footage that appeared to show Sarah screaming at Derek, her hands gesturing wildly. Audio clips played of a woman's voice, distorted but recognizable, making threats. "I'll destroy you if you leave me, and this baby and I would be better off dead than abandoned." Sarah knew the footage was manipulated, the audio taken completely out of context or possibly fabricated entirely. But to viewers, it looked damning. "She became obsessed with paranoid conspiracy theories," Madison added, her voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "She accused Derek of impossible things, like embezzling money from his own company and hiding assets offshore. She desperately needed psychiatric treatment, but she refused all help." The media coverage was relentless. Expert commentators discussed Sarah's apparent psychological breakdown. Social media exploded with hot takes about mentally unstable women and the dangers of pregnancy hormones. The narrative was devastating and spreading like wildfire. Sarah Sterling was a delusional, violent woman whose pregnancy had triggered a complete psychological collapse. "The most heartbreaking part," Derek continued, dabbing at his eyes with what Sarah recognized as completely fake tears, "is that I still love the woman I married, but she's not that person anymore. I have to protect myself and our child from someone who has become genuinely dangerous." The coup de grace came the next morning. Sarah received a call from the California Board of Nursing. "Mrs. Sterling, we're calling to inform you that your nursing license is under formal investigation due to credible allegations of mental instability and violent behavior toward family members. Until this investigation is complete, your license is suspended indefinitely." Sarah's last hope of supporting herself and her baby vanished in that single phone call. Even if she somehow found the strength to start over, she couldn't work in the only profession she knew and loved. That afternoon, as Sarah sat in the shelter's common room staring at news coverage of her supposed mental breakdown, a man in an expensive suit approached her table. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm James Blackwood. I've been following your story, and I believe you've been treated unfairly." James Blackwood looked like the opposite of Derek in every way. Where Derek was flashy and loud, James was understated and thoughtful. His gray eyes held genuine sympathy behind wire-rimmed glasses, and his voice carried the measured tone of someone who chose his words carefully. "I'm a venture capitalist," James explained, sitting across from her in the shelter's visiting area. "I've made it my mission to expose corruption in the tech industry. Derek Sterling represents everything that's wrong with Silicon Valley culture." For the next 2 hours, James listened to Sarah's story without judgment, taking careful notes and asking thoughtful questions. He didn't interrupt or try to correct her, didn't look at her with pity or skepticism. For the first time in months, Sarah felt heard. "Derek Sterling is a fraud," James said matter-of-factly when she finished. "I've been investigating his business practices for the past year. Tax evasion, securities fraud, inflated user numbers reported to investors. He's built his entire empire on lies and criminal behavior." James showed Sarah documents that made her heart race with hope. Financial records proving Derek had been moving money to offshore accounts. Communications with investors containing falsified growth metrics. Evidence of Securities and Exchange Commission violations that could send Derek to federal prison for decades. "With this evidence, we can destroy him completely," James said, his voice carrying quiet conviction. "But I need your help. You know Derek better than anyone. You understand his psychological weaknesses and behavioral patterns? What do you need me to do? Sarah asked, feeling genuine hope for the first time since the courthouse disaster. James's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Sarah would wear a wire during a meeting with Derek, getting him to admit to his illegal business activities on tape. The recording would be turned over to federal authorities, and Derek's criminal empire would collapse like a house of cards. But why are you helping me? Sarah asked, still struggling to believe that someone powerful actually wanted to support her instead of destroy her. James's expression darkened with what looked like genuine pain. Because men like Derek Sterling think they can destroy anyone who threatens their power. My younger sister went through something very similar with her tech executive husband. The stress and public humiliation destroyed her health. He paused, collecting himself. She died from complications during her pregnancy. I couldn't save her, but I can save you and make sure Derek pays for what he's done. Sarah agreed immediately. She had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Her baby deserved better than being raised by a criminal who planned to lie about their mother for their entire life. The meeting was arranged for the following week. Derek, James explained, was growing increasingly desperate to avoid a messy custody battle that might expose his business practices to government scrutiny. He would agree to meet Sarah privately to discuss reasonable terms for their separation. Sarah spent 3 days preparing with James's coaching. She practiced the questions that would lead Derek to incriminate himself, rehearsed staying calm under pressure, learned how to guide conversations toward admissions of guilt. The wire felt natural after the first day of practice. The night before the meeting, Sarah lay on her narrow shelter cot, feeling her baby's weak movements. The stress and poor nutrition had taken their toll, but soon everything would change. Tomorrow we get justice, she whispered to her unborn child. Tomorrow Daddy finally pays for what he's done to us. But Sarah had no idea that James Blackwood wasn't her salvation. He was Derek's most trusted business partner, and the elaborate trap they had constructed wasn't designed to destroy Derek. It was designed to destroy her so completely that she would never threaten their empire again. The meeting location was a small cafe in Sausalito, far from the San Francisco tech scene where Derek was constantly recognized by investors and media. Sarah arrived 30 minutes early, the recording device taped securely beneath her maternity blouse, James's coaching echoing in her mind like a mantra. Derek walked in 45 minutes late, his trademark power move. He wore dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, looking more like a lifestyle magazine cover than a man potentially facing federal prison. He slid into the booth across from Sarah without acknowledging her pregnancy or asking about her health. Let's make this efficient, Derek said, checking his Patek Philippe watch. Madison and I have dinner reservations at Michelin-starred restaurant, and I don't like to keep successful people waiting. We need to discuss the baby, Sarah began, following James's carefully rehearsed script. Support payments, custody arrangements, what happens after they're born? Derek laughed, the sound devoid of any warmth or humanity. The future? Sarah, you're living in a homeless shelter. You have no job, no money, no prospects, and apparently no mental stability. What kind of future could you possibly provide for a child? I could provide a stable environment if you weren't systematically destroying my life, Sarah said, her anger genuine despite the performance aspect. All that money you've been hiding in offshore accounts, all those fake business metrics you've been feeding to investors? Derek's eyes sharpened like a predator sensing danger. What exactly are you talking about? I know about the Cayman Islands accounts, Derek. The inflated user numbers you reported to get your Series B funding. The tax avoidance schemes you've been running through shell companies. For a moment, Derek looked genuinely surprised, almost impressed. Then his expression shifted to something Sarah had never seen before. Calculated amusement mixed with pity. You've been doing research, and he said, pulling out his phone and seeming to send a text message. That's actually somewhat impressive for someone in your current circumstances. Derek set his phone on the table, screen facing up. Sarah's heart began racing as she wondered if he was recording their conversation or trying to leave. You're wearing a wire, Derek said suddenly, his voice completely calm. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? Excellent performance, Sarah. The desperation, the righteous anger, the attempt at manipulation. You really missed your calling as an actress. Derek's smile was predatory and satisfied. James, you can join us now. James Blackwood emerged from behind a partition near the cafe's back corner, but instead of looking surprised or concerned about Derek discovering their plan, he was smiling the exact same cold smile as Derek. Truly impressive work, Sarah, James said, sliding into the booth next to Derek as if they had planned this meeting together. The emotional vulnerability, the determination to seek justice. You almost made me believe you actually had a chance. Sarah's entire world tilted violently off its axis. James, what are you doing? We have him. He's right here admitting to everything. We have you, Derek corrected, his voice filled with satisfaction. James has been my silent business partner for over 3 years. He's been funding my expansion while maintaining a completely clean public profile for his venture capital firm. James nodded approvingly, like a professor pleased with a student's progress. Derek came to me months ago with a concerning problem. A potentially problematic wife who might become a significant liability during our planned IPO process. We needed a comprehensive solution that would discredit you so thoroughly that you'd never pose a threat to our business interests again. The recording device under Sarah's shirt suddenly felt like a noose tightening around her neck. You've been recording this entire conversation. Every single word, James confirmed, producing a small digital recorder from his jacket pocket. A desperate, mentally unstable pregnant woman attempting to blackmail her successful ex-husband with completely fabricated accusations of financial crimes. Making threats, wearing illegal recording equipment, clearly suffering from severe psychological delusions. This recording will obliterate any remaining credibility you might have. Sarah tried to stand and leave, but Derek grabbed her wrist with enough force to leave marks. Sit down. We're nowhere near finished with you. The offshore accounts are absolutely real, James continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather. But they belong to my legitimate investment firm, not Derek's company, completely legal, properly reported to all relevant authorities. The evidence I showed you was carefully crafted fiction designed to lead you exactly where we wanted you to go. Derek leaned forward, his grip tightening on Sarah's arm hard enough to cut off circulation. But here's the truly beautiful part of our plan. Tomorrow morning, you're going to sign comprehensive documents terminating all parental rights to our child. Full custody to me and Madison, 0 visitation rights, no contact whatsoever. I will never do that. You can't make me. Oh, but we can, James said, producing a tablet computer. Because if you refuse, this recording goes to every major news outlet in the country within the hour. Sarah Sterling, the unhinged ex-wife who tried to frame her successful husband with fabricated financial crimes while secretly recording him. Your nursing license investigation becomes permanent and public. Your parents' house, which is still posted as collateral for your legal debts, gets seized by Derek's legal team immediately. Sarah felt her baby kicking frantically, responding to her elevated heart rate and the stress hormones flooding her system. You can't destroy innocent people. We can destroy anyone who threatens our business empire, Derek said coldly. James has been orchestrating this entire scenario for the past 6 months. Every move you've made, every decision you thought was your own idea, has been carefully guided by our psychological manipulation. The divorce filing, the evidence gathering, even your stay at that pathetic shelter. We've been controlling your life while you thought you were fighting for it. James showed her a series of photographs on his tablet. Pictures of Sarah at the shelter, looking desperate and defeated. Pictures of her meeting with James, accepting help from a man she thought was a stranger. Pictures of her arriving at today's meeting with hidden recording equipment clearly visible under her clothes. Public narrative is absolutely everything in the modern information environment, James explained with academic detachment. And your narrative is now permanently established as that of an unstable, vindictive woman who became dangerously obsessed with destroying her ex-husband when she couldn't handle his legitimate success. Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. Why go to all this trouble? Why not just divorce me quietly? Derek's smile was reptilian in its complete lack of human warmth. Because I don't share power, control, or children. This baby will be raised by successful, psychologically stable parents in an environment of wealth and achievement. Madison and I will provide everything a child needs to succeed in life. Madison isn't the biological mother. Madison will be the only mother this child ever knows. Derek corrected matter-of-factly. You'll be a cautionary tale we occasionally mention at dinner parties. The mentally ill gold digger who lost her mind when she couldn't handle being married to a successful entrepreneur. James handed Sarah a pen and a thick stack of legal documents. Sign these papers right now and disappear from our lives quietly. Continue fighting us, and we'll destroy what remains of your existence so completely that your own parents will refuse to take your phone calls. Sarah stared at the papers through tears that made the words blur together. Voluntary termination of all parental rights. A comprehensive, non-disclosure agreement preventing her from ever speaking about Derek or their marriage. A restraining order she would be signing against herself, legally prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of Derek, Madison, or their child. I need time to consider this. You have exactly 60 seconds, Derek said, checking his watch with theatrical precision. Madison is waiting for me at the restaurant, and pregnant or not, I refuse to be late for dinner because of your dramatics. Sarah looked around the cafe desperately, searching for help, for witnesses, for anything that might save her. But James and Derek had chosen their location perfectly. The few other customers were absorbed in their laptops and private conversations, completely unaware of the life-altering cruelty happening just feet away. Her baby kicked again, weaker than before. The stress was slowly killing both of them. 30 seconds, Derek announced. Sarah closed her eyes, took a shaking breath, and signed away her rights to her own child. But as she handed the documents back to Derek with trembling hands, Sarah realized something that both men, in their arrogance and complete confidence in their own brilliance, had completely overlooked. They had been so focused on controlling her story and destroying her credibility that they had forgotten one crucial detail. She wasn't the only person who knew their secrets, and she wasn't the only woman they had underestimated. Their perfect plan had one fatal flaw, and Sarah was about to exploit it in ways that would destroy them both. Madison Cross was not what Sarah expected when they met in the shadowy parking garage beneath a downtown Oakland shopping center 3 days after the cafe betrayal. The woman who had publicly humiliated her, stolen her husband, and moved into her home looked exhausted and genuinely frightened. "You actually came," Madison said, her trademark confidence replaced by nervous energy that made her hands shake. "I wasn't sure you would after everything I've done to you." "Your message said you had something important about Derek and James," Sarah replied, her hand instinctively protecting her belly. "So talk." Madison glanced around the concrete structure, checking for security cameras and listening devices with the paranoia of someone who had learned not to trust anyone. "They think they're so brilliant, but they made one critical mistake," Madison said, pulling a small digital recorder from her designer purse. "They trusted me completely because they think I'm just another beautiful, empty-headed woman who can be controlled with money and attention." She held up the device, no bigger than a thumb drive. "I've been recording Derek for weeks. Insurance, you know. Men like him always have an exit strategy planned for everyone in their lives except themselves." Sarah stared at the recorder. "What's on it?" "Everything you need to destroy them both," Madison said, her voice gaining strength. "Derek bragging to James about how perfectly they manipulated you. Detailed plans to take your baby and move overseas if their legal strategy had failed. And most importantly, the real financial crimes you accuse them of." Madison's perfectly manicured hands continued shaking as she held the device. "It turns out you were absolutely right about the offshore accounts and the securities fraud. I heard them discussing how to transfer even more money before their IPO makes them too visible to government investigators." "Why are you helping me?" Sarah asked, studying Madison's face for signs of deception. "You destroyed my marriage and took everything I loved." Madison's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Because I'm next on their elimination list. Derek's already discussing replacing me with someone younger for the IPO roadshow and media appearances. He thinks I'm getting too old and demanding at 24. She showed Sarah a series of text messages on her phone. Derek discussing Madison's expiration date like she was a product with a limited shelf life. James offering detailed advice on how to transition away from Madison without generating negative publicity that might affect their stock price. "I thought I was different," Madison continued, tears starting to streak her perfect makeup. "I thought I was special because I was beautiful and young and understood his business vision. But I'm just another disposable woman to him, just like you were." Sarah studied Madison's face, looking for any hint that this might be another elaborate trap. The woman who had publicly mocked her pregnancy weight, who had moved into her nursery and destroyed her carefully chosen decorations, who had posed for photographers while Sarah faced homelessness. "You could have warned me months ago," Sarah said finally. "You could have saved me from losing everything." "I should have," Madison admitted, her voice cracking with genuine remorse. "But I was terrified and selfish and stupid. I believed Derek when he told me you were trying to ruin him out of jealousy and mental illness. I thought I was protecting him from you. What changed your mind?" Madison was quiet for a long moment, staring at the concrete floor. "Yesterday, Derek told me about their long-term plans for your baby, about how they're going to tell your child that mommy was mentally ill and abandon them because she couldn't handle being a parent. He was laughing about it, Sarah. Actually laughing about lying to an innocent child for their entire life." Fresh tears ran down Madison's cheeks, destroying what remained of her camera-ready appearance. "I grew up never knowing my real mother. My father told me she was severely mentally ill, that she abandoned us because she couldn't handle the responsibility of raising a child. I spent 20 years believing I was fundamentally unlovable because my own mother didn't want me." She looked directly at Sarah with eyes full of pain. "I found out when I turned 18 that he had been lying my entire life. My mother fought desperately for custody and lost because my father had more money and better lawyers. She died in a car accident 2 years later, still fighting through the courts to see me just once." Sarah felt her entire perspective shifting. Madison wasn't just Derek's mistress or her replacement. She was another woman who had been systematically manipulated and used by powerful men who saw women as interchangeable possessions. "So what do we do now?" Sarah asked. Madison's smile returned, but now it looked predatory and dangerous instead of confident and alluring. "We destroy them both completely, but we have to be smarter and more ruthless than they are." Over the next 3 hours in the oil-stained concrete garage that smelled of exhaust and broken dreams, two women who had been turned against each other began planning the systematic destruction of the men who had underestimated them both. Madison had complete access to Derek's financial records, his private communications with James, and his real business plans that differed dramatically from what they told investors. Sarah had intimate knowledge of Derek's psychological weaknesses, his deepest fears, and the pressure points that could make him lose control. "The IPO announcement is scheduled for next Tuesday," Madison explained, showing Sarah Derek's calendar on her phone. "He's supposed to ring the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Maximum publicity, maximum investor attention, maximum potential for catastrophic failure." "Perfect," Sarah said, a plan beginning to form in her mind. "James told me that public narrative is everything in the modern world. Let's give them a narrative they'll never recover from." Madison's phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Where are you? Investors want to meet my chief creative officer before dinner." "I have to go," Madison said, carefully pocketing the recorder. "But Sarah, once we do this, there's absolutely no going back. They'll try to destroy us both in ways we can't even imagine." Sarah looked down at her swollen belly, thinking about the child who would grow up believing lies about their mother, raised by people who saw them as a possession and a prop, rather than a human being deserving of love. "They already destroyed us," Sarah said with quiet determination. "Now it's our turn to show them what real power looks like." As Madison drove away in her red Tesla, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope mixed with righteous anger and the anticipation of justice. Derek and James thought they had won by turning women against each other, by making them compete for scraps of male approval and financial security. They were about to learn that united women were their absolute worst nightmare, and their perfect plan was about to become their complete destruction. The IPO announcement was scheduled for 9:30 on Tuesday morning Eastern Time. Derek would ring the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange, surrounded by investors, financial media, and Madison, who was supposed to represent the innovative, youthful leadership that made Connect Now a revolutionary company worth investing billions in. Instead, at exactly 9:15 Eastern Time, Madison Cross went live on Instagram from Derek's own corner office in downtown San Francisco. "Good morning, everyone," Madison said, her camera perfectly positioned to show the Connect Now logo and company mission statement on the wall behind her. "I'm Madison Cross, and I have something extremely important to share about Derek Sterling and his company that the public deserves to know. The viewer count exploded as Madison's 2 million followers began sharing the live stream across every social media platform. Within minutes, hundreds of thousands of people were watching, and the numbers continued climbing exponentially. For the past 8 months, I've been Derek Sterling's mistress, Madison continued, her voice steady and clear despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. I've also been secretly recording our conversations, and what I've learned will shock everyone who believes in his public image. In New York, Derek was backstage at the stock exchange, reviewing his speech notes and preparing for the most important moment of his career. His phone began buzzing with notifications, but he ignored them completely, focused entirely on the triumph that would make him a billionaire. Madison held up the digital recorder Sarah had seen in the parking garage. Derek Sterling is not the innovative tech entrepreneur and family man you think he is. He's a criminal who has stolen millions from investors and systematically destroyed anyone who threatened to expose him. She pressed play on the first recording. Derek's voice filled hundreds of thousands of phone speakers around the world. The user growth numbers we report are complete fiction, Derek's recorded voice said clearly. But as long as we go public before anyone runs a real audit, we'll be billionaires before the SEC figures out we've been lying for years. The viewer count hit 1 million and continued climbing. Here's Derek discussing how he and his business partner manipulated his pregnant wife into signing away her rights to their child. Madison continued, queuing up another devastating recording. Derek's voice again, unmistakably clear. Sarah's so broken and desperate now, she'll sign anything we put in front of her. Once the baby's born, we'll tell it that mommy was mentally ill and abandoned them. Perfect family narrative for our IPO story and media coverage. The comment section exploded with outrage. Viewers were frantically tagging news outlets, sharing the stream across every platform, and creating hashtags that began trending worldwide within minutes. Derek Sterling exposed, One Newer Connect Now fraud, and Justice for Sarah all began climbing the trending charts simultaneously. At the New York Stock Exchange, Derek finally looked at his phone as assistants and handlers began whispering urgently around him. His face went completely white as he saw notification after notification about Madison's livestream. "What the hell is happening?" he demanded, showing his phone to James, who had flown to New York specifically for this moment of triumph. James quickly pulled up the live stream on his own device. His expression shifted from confusion to absolute panic as he heard his own voice joining Derek's on the recording. "The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands need another 100 million transferred before the Securities and Exchange Commission starts investigating our financial structure too closely," James's recorded voice said with damning clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Madison announced to her audience, which had now grown to over 2 million viewers watching in real time, "I want you to meet the woman these men tried to destroy completely." The camera panned to reveal Sarah, sitting calmly in Derek's executive chair, wearing a simple black dress that emphasized her advanced pregnancy. She looked directly into the camera with the quiet strength she had discovered in her darkest moments. "Hello," Sarah said, her voice carrying the measured power of someone who had been through hell and emerged stronger. "My name is Sarah Sterling, and I want to tell you the truth about the man who tried to erase me from my own life." Derek was running now, pushing frantically through the crowd at the stock exchange, desperately trying to reach a taxi or any form of transportation that could get him back to San Francisco. But everywhere he looked, people were staring at their phones, watching his empire crumble in real time, pointing at him with recognition and disgust. Sarah spoke directly to the camera, her words carefully chosen and devastatingly effective. "Derek Sterling told the world I was mentally unstable, that I abandoned my child, that I tried to extort him with false accusations. But the truth is much simpler and infinitely worse than his lies." She gestured to Madison, who held up financial documents and bank statements. Derek Sterling built his company on systematic fraud. He stole from investors who trusted him. He manipulated stock prices and reported false information to government regulators. And when his pregnant wife discovered evidence of his crimes, he tried to destroy her completely rather than face the consequences of his actions. The New York Stock Exchange canceled Derek's IPO announcement within 20 minutes. Trading in Connect Now stock, which had been climbing in pre-market anticipation, was suspended indefinitely pending investigation. The Securities and Exchange Commission issued an emergency statement promising immediate and comprehensive investigation into all allegations. Within 2 hours, Derek and James were in federal custody. The FBI had been quietly building a case based on financial evidence Madison and Sarah had been providing for weeks, but the recorded admissions gave them everything needed for immediate arrests on charges of securities fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The media frenzy was unprecedented in tech industry history. Every major news outlet covered the story of the tech CEO whose IPO collapsed live on social media during his moment of supposed triumph. The hashtag #JustSean Sarah Sterling Truth became a rallying cry for women who had been silenced, manipulated, or destroyed by powerful men who thought their money made them untouchable. That evening, Sarah sat in the hospital where she had given birth to her daughter just 6 hours earlier. The baby, healthy and perfect, despite months of stress and poor nutrition, slept peacefully in her arms while news crews gathered outside, hoping for a statement or photograph. Madison knocked softly on the hospital room door. "How are you feeling?" "Like I can breathe freely for the first time in a year," Sarah said, looking down at her daughter's perfect, peaceful face. "She'll grow up knowing the truth about both her parents. All of it, good and bad." Madison's phone displayed the latest updates. Derek's assets were completely frozen pending criminal investigation. James's venture capital firm was under federal investigation for fraud and money laundering. Both men faced potential sentences of 25 years to life in federal prison. "The women's shelter called," Madison said softly. "They're naming their new advocacy and legal aid program after you, the Sarah Sterling Foundation for Truth and Justice in Family Court." Sarah smiled, but her focus remained entirely on her daughter. "What about you? What happens next for Madison Cross?" Madison shrugged, but her expression was hopeful for the first time Sarah had seen. "I'm testifying against them next week in federal court. After that, I'm thinking about going back to school to study law. Apparently, I have a talent for bringing down corrupt, powerful men who think women are disposable." A nurse entered with discharge papers and legal documents. "Mrs. Sterling, you're free to go home whenever you feel ready." "Actually," Sarah said, looking at the birth certificate form with determination, "it's Sarah Mitchell now. I'm taking back my original name, and my daughter will have it too." As she carried her daughter out of the hospital, Sarah passed the wall of news crews and photographers waiting outside. She didn't stop to answer their shouted questions or pose for their cameras. She had already said everything that mattered. Derek Sterling's empire had crumbled not because of insider trading or tax evasion, but because he had fundamentally underestimated the women he tried to control and discard. In the end, the man who thought he could manipulate anyone had been systematically destroyed by the two women he considered most expendable. The last image the cameras captured was Sarah walking into the California sunset, her daughter secure in her arms, finally free from the shadow of the man who had tried to erase her from her own story. Justice, Sarah realized, sometimes came not from courts or laws, but from the simple act of women refusing to be silenced. 2 years later, Sarah stood before a panel of California nursing board members in a conference room that smelled of coffee and justice finally served. Her daughter Emma played quietly with wooden blocks nearby, her dark hair catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. The hearing was purely ceremonial. Derek's confession, recorded by Madison and played during his federal trial, had included his detailed admission to fabricating all allegations that led to Sarah's license suspension. The board had no choice but to clear her record completely. "Ms. Mitchell," the board chairman said, reading from prepared remarks, "we find absolutely no evidence of professional misconduct or mental instability. Your nursing license is hereby fully reinstated, with our sincere apologies for the investigation's impact on your career and personal life." Sarah nodded her thanks, but her mind was already on the important work ahead. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation, funded partly by the massive settlement from Derek's seized criminal assets, had helped over 800 women escape abusive relationships and rebuild their lives from destruction. Outside the hearing room, Madison waited with coffee and her familiar, supportive smile. She had completed her law degree the previous spring and now served as the foundation's legal director, specializing in family court advocacy for women facing powerful, manipulative men. "How does it feel to be officially vindicated?" Madison asked as they walked toward the parking garage. Like the final piece of a very complicated puzzle falling into place, Sarah replied, watching Emma toddle confidently toward the playground equipment they had installed outside their offices. But vindication was never really the point. Justice was what mattered. Derek Sterling had been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for securities fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. James Blackwood received 22 years for his role as the criminal enterprise's financial architect. Both men had lost everything: their reputations, their fortunes, their freedom, and their influence. Their business empire had been systematically dismantled and its assets distributed among their victims as court-ordered restitution. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't their spectacular downfall. It was the life she had built from the ashes of their systematic cruelty and betrayal. The foundation occupied a renovated warehouse complex in Oakland, not far from the shelter where Sarah had lived during her darkest days. Today it provided safe housing, comprehensive legal assistance, job training, childcare, and emotional support for 50 families at any given time, with hundreds more receiving ongoing help as they rebuilt their independence. "Mama, swing!" Emma called out, her voice full of the joy and security that every child deserved, but not every child received. As Sarah pushed her daughter on the swing set they had built in the foundation's central courtyard, she reflected on the winding journey that had brought them to this moment of simple happiness. The pain, the humiliation, the moments when she thought she might not survive Derek's cruelty, had all led to this life of purpose and genuine fulfillment. Her phone buzzed with a text from a journalist. Even 2 years after Derek's conviction, reporters occasionally reached out for updates on the Connect Now scandal or anniversary pieces about corporate fraud in Silicon Valley. Sarah rarely responded anymore. That chapter of her story was complete. Her focus was entirely on the future she was building. "Miss Sarah," called Linda, one of the foundation's current residents, "Channel 7 wants to interview you about the new federal legislation. The Sarah Mitchell Act, signed into law 6 months earlier, made it a federal crime to use fabricated audio or video evidence in family court proceedings. Derek's deepfake recordings had been sophisticated enough to fool initial investigators. But the new law would protect future victims from similar high-tech manipulation and character assassination." "Tell them to contact Madison," Sarah said, then immediately reconsidered. "Actually, tell them we'll do a joint interview tomorrow. It's important for people to see that this work requires multiple perspectives and expertise." Madison laughed. "You built this foundation from nothing, Sarah. You're the one legislators and reporters want to hear from." "We built it together," Sarah corrected firmly. "I may have been the victim who inspired it, but you're the one who figures Sarah's story proves something powerful. No matter how broken you feel, no matter how impossible your situation seems, you have more strength than you realize. And sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most meaningful victories. If this story moved you, if Sarah's journey resonated with something deep inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to help this story reach other people who need to hear it. Share it with someone who might be fighting their own battle against powerful people who think they're untouchable. And if you believe in stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary strength, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell, because we're building a community here of people who refuse to stay silent, who believe that justice is possible, and who know that the best revenge against those who try to silence you is using your voice to help others find theirs. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And you're stronger than you know. What do you think? Have you ever faced someone who tried to make you feel powerless? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's build a community where no one fights alone.